Chapter 1. The Emerald Isles Call. The very air of County Cork in 1859 was a suffocating shroud, a viscous, bone-gnawing dampness that clung like a second skin, a chill and mirror to the soul-crushing desolation that had been the land's dominion for uncounted years. For John Thurman, his knuckles forever raw from the unforgiving soil, and Peter O'Brien, whose gaze held the haunted wisdom of a man far older than his tender years, the acrid perfume of peat fires and the desolate bleating of unseen sheep were woven into the very fabric of their existence, as primal as the desperate thrumming within their own chests. But beneath the veneer of their back-breaking days, a tempest brewed, a volatile yearning ignited by the phantom whispers of salt-crusted sailors and the fading siren song of abundance that America, a mythical horizon, seemed to possess. They were boys on the precipice of manhood, yet the spectral tendrils of the potato blight, though its ravenous maw had receded, still coiled around their village, a relentless, gnawing phantom of scarcity, a stark testament to life's brutal fragility. Those fertile fields, once the generous cradle of their forebears, now felt like a verdant cage, their mocking, vibrant green a cruel burlesque of the hollowed hunger that had claimed so many souls. John, ever the more thoughtful and observant of the two, often found himself perched on the low stone wall bordering their village, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the gray Irish Sea met the equally gray sky. He'd listen, rapt, as old Michael, a fisherman whose hands were as gnarled as the roots of an ancient oak, spoke of the new world. Michael's voice, raspy from salt spray and years of shouting over the wind, would paint vivid pictures of a land where the soil yielded riches beyond imagining, where cities scraped the heavens and where a man could carve out a fortune with hard work and a bit of luck. These stories, seasoned with the salt of the sea and the sting of memory, ignited a spark in John's young heart. He'd see the weariness etched on his mother's face, the way his father's shoulders slumped after another meager harvest, and he'd feel a fierce, protective urge to escape that cycle of hardship. America, in these hushed conversations, wasn't just a place. It was an escape, a promise of dignity, of a life where they wouldn't be beholden to the whims of weather or the sting of landlords' demands. Yet, a gnawing unease settled in John's stomach with each tantalizing tale. He knew his father, a man deeply rooted in the rhythms of this land, would never consider such a radical departure. The thought of abandoning their ancestral soil, the very ground his family had tilled for generations, felt like a betrayal, a tearing away of something vital. His conscience, a quiet but insistent voice, whispered of loyalty, of honoring his father's stubborn pride and his mother's unspoken fears of the unknown. Could he truly forsake their heritage for a glittering, distant promise? He wrestled with the deep-seated belief that true worth was found in perseverance, in making do with what they had, yet the image of his family struggling gnawed at him. He felt a pang of guilt, a whisper of the selfish desire for a better life, a life untainted by the constant struggle. The choice, looming larger with every moon, felt like an impossible calculus, to honor his roots and condemn his family to continued hardship, or to sever them and risk a future where his heart might forever ache for what he'd left behind. He began to see the glittering promise of America not just as a beacon of hope, but as a potential siren song, luring him away from the very people he longed to protect, forcing him to choose between loyalty and survival, a choice that already felt like a profound failure. Peter, on the other hand, was a creature of impulse and boundless, if often impractical, optimism. He'd absorb Michael's tales with wide, eager eyes, his imagination soaring, while John wrestled with the practicalities, the cost of passage, the risks involved, the wrench of leaving everything familiar, Peter would already be planning their grand arrival, envisioning the coin they'd amass, the fine clothes they'd wear, the stories they'd bring back to shame the doubters. He'd clap John on the shoulder, his grin wide enough to split his face. "Think of it, Johnny, a whole new life, no more scrabbling for scraps. We'll be men of standing, mark my words." For Peter, America represented not just an escape from poverty, but an escape from the perceived limitations of their small-town existence, a chance to be someone, to be more. But beneath the dazzling surface of his ambition, a knot of unease tightened in Peter's chest. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the stories Michael spun were likely embellished, even fabricated. His own father had chased similar pipe dreams, leaving Peter's mother to struggle alone, a ghost of abandonment that haunted Peter's own burgeoning desires. Was he, in his eagerness to escape his own perceived destiny of being forgotten, about to inflict the same pain on someone else? The thought made him queasy, a betrayal of the loyalty he prided himself on. He pictured his mother's weary face, the unspoken disappointment in her eyes when his father's grand ventures crumbled. Could he, in his desperate pursuit of glory, become the very thing he loathed, a dreamer who left others to bear the burden of his failures? He pushed the thought away, a familiar reflex, but it lingered like a bad taste. Their conversations, often held in the gloaming when the day's labor was done and the shadows lengthened, were a tapestry woven with threads of hope and a gnawing apprehension. They'd speak in hushed tones, as if the very air might carry their dreams to the ears of those who would dismiss them as foolish fancy. "Do you truly think it's as good as they say, John?" Peter might ask, his voice dropping, the bravado momentarily receding. A flicker of guilt would then cross his face as he caught himself, forcing a brighter smile. "Not that it matters," he'd add quickly, a forced lightness in his tone. "We'll make it good, won't we?" John would consider, his brow furrowed. "Michael says the work is hard, Peter, but the pay is fair. And there's land, he says, for anyone with the will to work it. But it's a long way, a very long way." The immensity of the Atlantic Ocean, a vast, untamed expanse they'd only ever glimpsed from the cliffs, loomed large in their minds. It was a watery frontier, both terrifying and enticing. For Peter, the ocean was also a stark reminder of the finality of their choice. Leaving meant abandoning the fragile network of community that had sustained them, even in their poverty. It meant leaving behind old Mrs. Gable, who always had a warm crust for him, and the blacksmith's son, his only childhood friend. The thought of their faces, bewildered and perhaps even betrayed, pricked at him. He craved the adventure, the promise of a life beyond this drab existence, but the cost felt increasingly steep, a price he wasn't sure he had the right to ask John to pay, or to inflict on the familiar comfort of their known world. He wanted to be a hero, but the possibility of becoming a reckless fool, a source of regret for those he cared about, was a shadow that refused to dissipate. They spoke of their families, the mothers who would weep at their departure, the fathers who would offer quiet, stoic blessings. John felt a pang of guilt at the thought of leaving his ailing grandmother, whose stories of Ireland's ancient past had first sparked his imagination. It was a familiar guilt, one that had gnawed at him for months as he watched her fade, a silent accusation in her weary eyes whenever he spoke of dreams beyond their village. He'd sworn he'd never abandon her, a promise whispered in the shadowed intimacy of her sick room, a promise he was now about to shatter. Peter, more outwardly demonstrative, would speak of his younger siblings, promising to send for them as soon as he was established. But even Peter's bravado couldn't quite mask the tremor in his voice when he mentioned their mother, the fear that she would simply crumble under the weight of their absence, a fear he now carried as a heavy, unwelcome burden. These were not decisions taken lightly. They were acts of desperate hope, born from a homeland that offered little solace and a future that seemed to offer only more of the same. The fertile fields, once a source of pride and sustenance, now felt like a cage, their verdant beauty a stark contrast to the barrenness of opportunity. Yet, the very soil beneath their feet, the soil that held their ancestors, whispered of loyalty, of roots that ran too deep to sever without tearing a part of themselves away. The idea of leaving everything they knew, their homes, their kin, was a terrifying prospect, a betrayal of the generations who had tilled this land, who had bled for it. But then came the whisper of a new world, a world of possibility growing louder with each passing day, a siren song that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. It was a song that promised escape, yes, but also demanded a sacrifice, a rending of the soul that left John feeling hollowed out, a thief of his own past, a traitor to the quiet devotion he felt for his ailing grandmother. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the moment he stepped onto that ship, a part of him would forever remain behind, a shadow clinging to the memory of a promise broken, a duty forsaken. The rough linen of his shirt chafed against Liam's skin as he leaned against the weathered stone wall, the salt spray of the Atlantic mist clinging to his beard like tiny, shimmering diamonds. Across the cobbled lane, Maeve tucked a stray curl behind her ear, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a fierce, quiet hope etched into the lines around her eyes. The worn leather satchel at her feet bulged, a testament to hours spent painstakingly gathering meager possessions. "Another ship sailed this morning," Liam said, his voice a low rumble, the words swallowed by the gull's sharp cry overhead. He watched a lone seagull plummet, its wings a stark white against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, a mirror of the hunger that gnawed at his own gut. Maeve's fingers tightened on the worn wooden handle of her basket. "And they'll be gone by the next tide." Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. The air, usually thick with the earthy scent of peat smoke and the bleating of distant sheep, now held a metallic tang, the scent of impending departure. He could almost taste the salt on his tongue, a prelude to the vast ocean that separated them from everything they knew. Liam kicked a loose pebble, sending it skittering towards the restless waves. He'd spent his days mending nets that caught more air than fish, his nights listening to the wind howl like a mournful spirit through the cracks in their cottage. Now the wind seemed to carry a different tune, a hurried rhythm of packing crates and whispered promises. "America," Maeve breathed, the word a soft exhale, almost a prayer. Her eyes, the color of the deepest sea, held a gleam that hadn't been there before, a spark ignited by whispered tales of cities built of gold and tables groaning with food. It was a dangerous dream, a wild gamble, but the gnawing emptiness in their bellies, the ever-present shadow of want, had sharpened their resolve. He watched her take a deep, steadying breath, her shoulders straightening. The faint scent of wildflowers, a stubborn bloom clinging to the rocky earth, mingled with the encroaching brine. He saw it then, not in words, but in the set of her jaw, the unwavering focus in her gaze, the unshakable conviction that their small corner of County Cork, with its enduring beauty and its persistent hardship, could no longer hold the burgeoning ambitions they nurtured in secret. The journey, vast and terrifying, was no longer a fantasy but a tangible path unfolding before them, paved with desperate hope. The decision, when it finally solidified, wasn't a single dramatic moment, but rather a slow, inexorable tide of acceptance. It seeped into their conversations, colored their every interaction, and finally settled in their hearts with a quiet, heavy finality. The dream of America, once a flickering candle flame, had grown into a steady, determined blaze. John, practical as ever, spent weeks meticulously calculating every penny they had managed to save, bartering for passage on a ship that promised to be more seaworthy than the leaky barges that sometimes ferried emigrants. Peter, meanwhile, threw himself into the mundane tasks of their impending departure with a restless energy, as if by keeping his hands busy, he could outrun the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. The goodbyes were etched in John's memory with a painful clarity. His mother, her face a roadmap of worry and love, pressed a worn rosary into his hand, her lips moving in a silent prayer. He could feel the tremors in her touch, the unspoken fear of never seeing him again. His father, a man of few words, simply clasped his shoulder, his grip firm, a silent acknowledgment of the momentous step his son was taking. For Peter, the farewells were a storm of tears and embraces. His mother wailed, clinging to him as if he were already lost to the sea, while his younger siblings, sensing the gravity of the occasion, clung to his legs, their faces streaked with tears. He promised them all riches, a grand house and a life of ease, his voice thick with emotion, a desperate attempt to assuage their sorrow and his own burgeoning guilt. The morning of their departure dawned cloaked in a thick gray mist, a fitting shroud for their farewell to Ireland. The small fishing village, usually bustling with the early morning activity of fishermen preparing their nets, was hushed, the only sounds the muffled sobs of women and the crunch of their worn boots on the damp earth. They boarded a small, sturdy fishing boat that would ferry them to the larger merchant vessel waiting beyond the harbor mouth. As the boat pulled away from the shore, John looked back, trying to imprint every detail onto his mind. The familiar curve of the bay, the jagged outline of the hills shrouded in mist, the tiny, whitewashed cottages that had been their world.